Hello and welcome to another episode of Inside Lowell. We're here in the Well Point Studios, all by ourselves. We have a very special episode. This is a segment I like to call Hills by the Mills, where me, Mark Gelsomini, I go and I talk about local parks and stuff. Today we're going to go talk about Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro, if you've ever been there. And me personally, I've been there a lot of times. I love going there. It's one of my favorite spots to just, relax, reconnect with nature, have a good time. It's probably the largest park around here in this immediate area. It's 100 acres, and it's beautiful. There's all kinds of different terrain. You got big rock clusters with some, kind of silly graffiti. You got a cool swampy bog in the middle, and then all these kinds of hills, buried in mills, all these kinds of hills and stuff that you can walk on. There's bike trails, there's all kinds of stuff. So it's a fun place, and I'm gonna try to get into the history of it a little bit, the kinds of people that were living there and what they were doing. I today was supposed to be with my co-host Derek. We had a little elevator trouble, so I'm gonna have a very lonely episode today. So yeah, it's just gonna be me, unfortunately. Next time, all right, we're gonna get a little bit into some of the spookier and more ghostly things concerning, some similar characters actually that we're gonna get into historically. So today's just gonna be that park, Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro. Next time, we're gonna talk about mostly just Tyngsboro and, some spooky occurrences. So stay tuned for that. So yeah, Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro. Who lived there? What was up with that? Before, I guess during the 1600s, but obviously before that too, the area was lived in by Native Americans, tons of different tribes, all similar, but, different in the ways they interacted and stuff. So specifically in that park, it was, the Mohawk tribe, the Huron, Wowanoks, and, of course, the Penacooks as well. I might be mispronouncing some of these names. I'm sorry if I am. But yeah, those were the tribes that were in the area. So the Penacooks, they kind of were on the rivers and stuff a lot. They kind of traveled up and down from New Hampshire and Nashua almost up to Manchester too, and they would come down, of course. We're gonna get into that. So what is kind of crazy to think about is that the population shrunk significantly when the first settlers came. So what was it, around 8,000 to 25,000 people in just the Merrimack Valley, which, that's technically a little bit above us right now. But that's just kind of give you the idea of some of the tribes. That's how large some of these interconnected tribes were. And if we're talking about all of New England, it was 70,000 to 100,000, people, natives in this area. And obviously their numbers plummeted significantly. They got way smaller, only 1,000 or less in some of these tribes, most of them less. And, those numbers only really got back up with white settlers and stuff in 1600s, 1700s. So, we think about it as Native Americans in this area, pretty sparse, not a whole lot of them, but it really was a thriving, set of communities and stuff. They, it was way more complex than we honestly should be giving them credit for, which is, kind of sad if you think about it. So, obviously life for them was very different than the settlers that came later in the 1700s. So one of the ways that these natives were able to survive was this farming method, which I learned about recently. It's very interesting. It's called the Three Sisters, is what I've heard it be referred to as. So it has to do with squash, beans, and corn. And honestly, it's kind of ingenious if you think about it. So you got your corn stalks, right? the mighty cornstalk. It's very, it's very stable. You know, it's tall and stuff. And when you plant that with beans, the bean vine kind of grows around it like a natural, I don't know what you call it, like a whatever, like a grapevine stalk or something. I don't know, but like a truss, right? So it would wrap around it and it would stabilize the corn, and it gave the beans more surface area to grow, which is really interesting. And then you also have the squash, right? And if you've ever grown pumpkins, they got some big leaves, big leaves. Okay, so which is great, because 15, 16, 1700s, you don't have pesticides and stuff. You don't have things that can get rid of the weeds. But when you have the squash growing around the corn and the beans, these massive leaves actually will keep a lot of the weeds and stuff away. So it's really ingenious. They all kind of worked together, and I forget which plant was feeding one plant, but essentially, I think it was the beans provided a lot of nitrogen for the squash or whatever, or the other way around. But they also, besides just like the physical aspect of like stabilizing and protecting them from weeds and stuff, they actually would share nutrients in a way, which I don't know. I just think that's really cool. All right. And then of course you also had like the slash and burn method for like preparing the land and stuff, which is kind of neat. You would cut up the forest floor, and then you'd let all that stuff burn away. And not only are you giving your plants nutrients, you're preparing it for farming. So there's a lot of ingenious ways that the natives would harvest their crops. And in a lot of ways, I feel like we should, as Americans today, we have some really nutrient deficient and not great for us food. And we could probably do a lot if we took a page out of some of the people that used to live here's book, and cleaned up what we're doing, because filling stuff up with pesticides and all the runoff that's getting into the water supply, it's not great. I'm a communications major, right? I did a paper a little while ago about, funnily enough, the fishing industry. Mark, what does the fishing industry have to do with beans and squash? Why are you talking about this? Well, because of industrial farming, a lot of runoff can get into the waterways and then eventually get to the sea and kill fish and stuff. So really, all the stuff that we're doing now with the way we farm is kind of messing up the rest of the environment. So it's not great. So that's some of the ingenious stuff they were doing. Yeah, and lots of disease really messed up the Native Americans. I mean, it's kind of like a myth if you think about it, that the colonists came here and they wiped out all the Native Americans. They just murdered all of them. They did a lot of that. They did do a lot of that, but it was really disease that was the thing that took out a majority of the pop, more than half, probably close to 70%, which is, insane if you think about it. Yeah. So we're going to get into some of the characters that shaped the area. And we're still kind of in the 1600s time frame. The main guy that kind of sets up this time period for historians is this guy called Metacomet. So he was the leader of the Wampanoags, which they were some of the first tribes to interact with the Pilgrims, right? Metacomet had a dad. I'm going to mispronounce his name. I believe it's pronounced Massasoit, something like that. He had a great relationship with the Pilgrims, After he died, Metacomet was like, what are we doing letting all these people come in, take over the place, and steal our way of life? So he kind of was the one to rally a lot of these tribes in the greater area, and he kind of trying to lead these people against, the Pilgrims and the people that were colonizing the land and stuff. And that was what historians call King Philip's War. Okay, and that's the thing. King Philip. Who's King Philip? Because when I was in school, I heard that, and I was like, oh, King Philip must have been some douchey king in England who's sitting on his throne, and he's like, kill all the natives, till the land. No, there's no British king named Philip. Actually, Metacomet's name was Philip, sort of anyway. His father, because he that I mispronounced earlier, Massasoit or whatever. His father had good relations with the Pilgrims and such, so he named his son Philip, which is got to be one of the greatest ironies. If this guy, Metacomet, knew that the war that he started against the white people is named after his white name, he would probably be rolling in his grave right now. I think that is absolutely ironic. So that's a fun fact for you. You want some more fun facts? I know you want some more fun facts. So, yeah. 1675, that's when his war started. And it ended pretty quick. Like the next year he was cornered by militia and he was killed. But the people remained in the area, of course, not for long. I mean, a lot of these natives eventually moved up to like Canada or, just moved east. But, it was not an easy time for them. Fun fact, though, Wampanoags, that the name Wampanoag means people of the first light. I don't really get it. It sounds cool, though. It sounds really cool. Another fact that is not so fun, but still kind of interesting, is that there are, a lot of Wampanoags, obviously, like we said, that moved up to Canada after this, and we're going to find out that's pretty much what a lot of these native tribes did. Surprisingly, there's actually a lot of people in the Caribbeans, or the Caribbean, depending on what side of the bed you woke up. There's a lot of people there who have Wampanoag genes, which is like super random. You got Northeastern Native Americans and the Caribbeans. What's up with that? Well, unfortunately, the colonists after the war sold a lot of them into slavery. So that is pretty messed up. But still, I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that, you got genetics of those people in that area. Like, I don't know. It's seemingly random, and, it's a tragic backstory. But, yeah, it's still very interesting nonetheless. So, yeah. So besides the war, they showed the Pilgrims how to farm the land. That would be Metacomet's father and his people at that time, that before the war they showed the Pilgrims. I would assume they were doing that same growing method as before. Clearly we didn't stick with it, though. So, yeah, and another thing about the Wampanoags, they were made up of like 67 different tribes. They had about 40,000 people in the early 1600s. That was before disease, right? And then, what do you know? 3/4 of them died, and they had about 10,000 after. So, you can't really blame Metacomet for being like, these people have come in, taken all of our land, and when we are, in turmoil, we got to do something about it. Like, it's a tragic story if you think about it. So, I mean, Metacomet, he was around like the Plymouth Bay Area. So Mark, why are we talking about him if this is supposed to be about Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro? Well, I'm getting to that. Be patient. So I mean, he obviously started that war, and that war reached across basically all of New England, if you think about it, including the space of Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro and stuff. And at the time, and was it 1675? Everybody in like Tyngsboro and like the surrounding areas, they all left for like that entire year, and everybody was basically gone, which is crazy if you think about it. Like all these people come in to grab this land, and then all these white people just move away. It's kind of crazy. Except this one crazy guy that we're going to learn a lot about today and next podcast. This crazy guy, his name is Colonel Ting. I believe it was Edward Ting. He was basically the only guy that stuck around. And yeah, he was good friends, according to my sources, which maybe good friends is not quite right. He was good friends with Passaconaway, which we're going to learn about it in a second. Passaconaway was the... Wait, I got it. He was the leader. I just mentioned it before, of that one tribe. The Penacooks. That's who it is. So, yeah, that's the thing. A lot of these sources say that, the Penacooks were the good Indians. Or, of course, they say Indians in it, not Native Americans, because these are old sources that I've been looking into. But, he's one of the good ones. And it's like, yeah, Passaconaway and his son, they tried not to, stoke the flames of war or whatever that was going on with Metacomet and his dispute that he had with the colonists. I mean, that being said, like, there's all these sources are like, he was so friendly, he loved them. I'm like, there's no way that he was like, oh yeah, Colonel Ting, you're my buddy, I love you so much, thank you for coming in and stealing all my land, thank you, you're great. Yeah, I mean, I seriously doubt that he was like super chummy with him. And on top of that, it wasn't all the Penacooks that were like completely on board, like, oh yeah, we're going to be neutral throughout this whole thing, because the Penacooks were getting screwed over not only by the colonists, and even, and we're going to get into it a little bit, they even got attacked by militias and stuff. They were also getting attacked by Metacomet's people, and also the Tomahawks as well, coming from the West. So they were kind of in between a rock and a hard place. They're kind of having a terrible go of things at this time. Yeah, so I don't really believe that he was like, oh, super chummy with them, and he just loved to have everything taken away from him. I don't really believe that. So, but so Passaconaway. Before Passaconaway, honestly, I think he died right before the war. I have it in here, right? Yeah, he died in 1669, so like 5 or 6 years before the war. And then it was his son that was the one in charge then, right? And so Passaconaway, before the war, I mean, like they had their land that kind of overlapped with the colonists. So yeah, for sure, it was definitely, they had a way more neutral and like peaceful agreement than the other tribes. That's for certain. So the Penacooks, they had like a reservation basically where Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro is right now. And it even kind of stretched all the way down to the Pawtucketville section of Lowell. Also, their favorite spot was Ting Island. If you've ever been to the Vesper Country Club, that was their favorite spot. And it makes sense, too, if you think about it. Because, you got this natural barrier all the way around you, so you're not going to have bears, you're not going to have, like, wolves or anything messing with you. You're going to have good defense from, anyone that's attacking you, whether it be other tribes or what have you. And it's right on the river, so you got easy access, get in and out. Because the Penacooks, I mean, that's really what they were, is they were obviously they farmed and stuff, but they also fished a lot too, and they were traders. They went all the way up and down the Merrimack, and they had some significant trading routes with, other parts of the Pennacook tribe, like the subsects of the tribes and other tribes for sure. And we're going to get into some of the interesting theories of who maybe they were trading with. That's to come. So, yeah. So, we got Paso Conaway. He's this, friendly chief with these not-so-friendly people. Lived in the current location of Vesper Country Club. Of course, they went up and down, but that was one of their favorite spots. Supposedly, he converted to Christianity in 1648 because of a clergyman named John Eliot. Now, if Paso Conaway was friends, really actual friends with any of these white people, I would guess it would be this guy, John Eliot, because John Eliot was trying to stop the natives from getting their land taken away. Basically, he went to court, and when the colonist courts were trying to sell this land to this veteran or whatever, he was like, no, like don't do it. He was like don't give it away. Not necessarily saying that to the natives, but also like talking to the court itself. He fought to prevent the sale, but he ultimately failed. And so it was Paso Conaway's daughter and him, with accordance of the general court from 1659, sold a majority of their land to this guy named John Webb. Eventually, John Webb would sell that land to the people who own the Hawk family farm right now. We'll get into it. So, yeah, John Eliot, this clergyman, he fought real hard to get them to not lose their land. But, by 1660, nearly all of their land was gone. I think by then they still had the Vesper Country Club, Tings Island. They still had that island. It wouldn't last too long, unfortunately. So in 1664, this is who John Webb sold a large portion of his land to, the Varnum family, Samuel Varnum. And I believe, actually, they might still have their farm, the Hawk Valley Farm, I believe is what it's called. I think it's actually, if you go to Varnum Ave, their original house is still there. And, I don't think it's necessarily open to the public. But I know they do have tours that they will bring like the local schools in, and they'll like teach them about like all the wildlife and stuff, which is pretty cool. I might have the website in here that I can mention later, but I'm pretty sure it's not open to the public, so don't get too excited. Still interesting nonetheless. They still have it. So yeah, 1669, Paso Conaway dies at Colonel Ting's mansion, which is where, he was living for his final days. Presumably, he was in good care at Colonel Ting's mansion. Colonel Ting definitely had a lot of slaves, and they sold a lot of Native Americans into slavery back then. But a lot of my sources say that he was having a good time. So I'm just going to go with that for now, that maybe he was just chilling. Yeah. So next guy, Wanalescent. That is Paso Conaway's son, right? And he was the guy that was trying to keep his tribe, the Pennacooks, out of war for the most part. So actually another tribe that I definitely cannot pronounce properly, the Tarentines, or the Micmac of Maine. They were also fighting the Pennacooks for sure. Of course, like I said, the Tomahawks. And then so there's this guy, also a white guy, Captain Samuel Mosley. He was part of militia during like that 1675, he was tracking down the Penacooks, and he tracked them all the way down the river to Concord, New Hampshire, where like one of their other villages was. Thankfully, at that point, a lot of pretty much all of them had fled, presumably to Canada. But this guy, Captain Samuel Mosley, decided, well, screw you. I'm going to burn down your houses and all your food stores. So that was all set ablaze. So they definitely had a really hard time that winter, which is really unfortunate. So yeah, so he was the one who won a lesson. He was the one who tried to maintain the peace. And, of course you had a lot of Penacooks that, weren't into it, and they did actually fight with King Philip as well. So that's kind of the reason why that militia guy followed them, is because, well, you guys say you're good, but then you got a couple of you that are pissed, understandably so. But, it's just unfortunate, the politics at the time. It's all complicated. So some fun facts. Now we're going to get into some fun facts about the Penacooks. So their name roughly translates to at the bottom of the hill, which is also interesting. So actually where I live is in Tyngsboro. I live on top of a hill. At the bottom of the hill is a lake, Mascuppick, I believe. And that area actually was one of the favorite spots of the natives. I went to the library, found a handwritten note by one of the colonists at the time, and he was saying that in that area, that's where they cut the brush, the natives, the whole slash and burn method. But, they didn't just use that for farming. It also had the advantage of if you're cutting and burning the forest floor, it's super easy to see deer and stuff like that too. It's great for hunting. So at the bottom of the hill where I live is actually where some of their favorite spots were. I have no idea if that is related to the name. I don't think they lived where my house is. I know some of my siblings actually did find arrowheads. If they could have just been, rocks that we misidentified. But I don't know. It's interesting to think about that. Maybe my house might be connected to these people. I mean, I live right where they were supposed to have been, so who knows? So the Penacooks, they lived on the east side of the Merrimack, and a large reason for that is to avoid the dangers from the west, which I said was the Tomahawks that were, battling them for a while, even before the colonists had came. Like I said, they had extensive trading routes up and down the river. So, okay, this is one of the more interesting things that I learned. At the time, before the colonists, and, even when they first started coming there, a large section, or pretty much all of the area, was like old growth forest. Like, if the old growth forest in, California now? The Redwoods. I mean, that was all of America was like that. If you don't have iron saws and tools, it's really, really, really hard to cut down these trees. Which is really interesting to think about, that just the landscape was just completely different. It's like a cityscape of just trees everywhere, But so, you still need space to farm, And one of the things that I think is super cool is that the Penacooks, and I'm sure maybe other tribes, they would mess with beavers. They would basically, I don't know exactly how they did it. They didn't really get into it from the source that I was getting into, but presumably they would just go up to where the beavers were. They'd break their house and maybe try to change how the dam, the beaver dam was flowing the water, so that the beavers would actually move and would cut down trees in an area that they would then use to farm. So they're using beavers to cut down trees, supposedly. I think that's super neat. It makes a hell of a lot of sense. I mean, if you don't got the tools to do the job, well, you got a bunch of animals over here that have been doing that for millions of years. So I think that's ingenious. That's super neat to me. So yeah, the only other thing I can think of that Penacooks and the other tribes were doing at the time. So close to the Pawtucketville section of Lowell, I mean, I know you got some like waterfalls over there. They would actually use those waterfalls, like the natural choke points in the river, to fish as well, which is pretty neat. So yeah. So that's kind of like what life was like in the area before, colonists came in and, made it the concrete jungle that it is today. So we got some other characters in this story, characters a little bit closer to today. So according to a paper from the Lowell Sun from 1970, there's this one guy named Gary Morin. Okay, he's a half Native American man from Dracut who, according to the paper, is quite knowledgeable about his people's history and stuff. I tried looking into this guy. I could not find anything else about him besides what I learned from this Lowell Sun paper. That being said, it's kind of a crazy rabbit hole that Gary Morin takes us on. So he's very knowledgeable about his people, who were the Wowanoks. I believe at the beginning I mentioned them as being some of the people who lived in the Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro area. So they claim, according to Gary Morin, like I said from this paper, they claim partial descent and influence from pre-Columbian Europeans. If you don't remember, I mean, it's do I remember the Columbus song? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, 14 something, blah blah blue. Right, that's when everything got messed up from that point. You get the 1600s, people coming in, diseases and stuff. Pre-Columbian means that these Native Americans, according to Gary Morin, were interacting with the Vikings, which is, to me, mind-blowing and crazy to think that, there was a time in history where you had Europeans, without gunpowder, without all these like super advanced weapons that we think of the colonists having that advantage over the Native Americans with. No, at this point, it was like more of an even fight, or if they did fight, which it would seem logical that they would, knowing the Vikings. That to me is super interesting because like what a disadvantage that the natives were at by the time of the 1600s. They got this new technology and they had all the diseases that cut down their population. At that point, it's like, well, it's actually like a fair fight, which is cool to me. I don't know. So apparently they had connection with the Vikings, so this guy says, and they lost contact with them during the Black Plague. So this would have been like 1000 AD is when the Vikings would have been around there. So is this true? Were the Vikings all the way down to like this area, Lowell? Probably not. Let's be real. I mean, like I said before, they did have extensive trading routes that went up north into like Maine and stuff. And what is true is that there's this place called Lance O's Meadows, this is in Canada, off of Newfoundland. Is it Newfoundland or is it Newfoundland? Newfoundland. Okay. Yeah. I don't know. Whatever. Canada. They're in Canada, or they're on an island off of Canada. There's an actual Viking settlement, an actual archaeological site that you can look up. And yeah, it was like twice as long as Columbus. True Viking settlement in the Americas. Crazy to think about. And they definitely had a base on this island. I mean, it's pretty up north, right? To say it's in America is like, yeah, it is. But just barely. It's an island off of it. It's crazy. And, you know, the settlement did have like a place to forge iron and stuff like that. You know, it was most likely like a base camp for them to further travel south. So, you know, hey, that gives credence to what Gary Morton was saying. If this really was like a little staging point for them to explore further south, they probably did have contact with Native Americans. And likely those Native Americans had contact with other Native Americans that would travel up and down the Merrimack and very well may have lived in Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro, which is kind of crazy. You got this Viking connection in the area. And it is a little weird at Lance's Meadows. I did listen to this one guy's podcast, this archaeologist. He was on Lex Friedman. Shout out Lex Friedman. And he was talking about how there was definitely, you know, like I said, Lance's Meadows, these Vikings and stuff. He thinks that the Vikings came and they got their ass kicked by the natives, which honestly they probably did. The Vikings had a super easy time in Europe, just especially Ireland. They would go to these monasteries and stuff, and there would just be these newly converted Catholic Irish monks that are like, "Oh, we are pacifists. We don't fight you." And the Vikings were like, "Oh, lit," and they just raided everything. So, needless to say, the Vikings had a very easy time. And if you think about the fact that the population of Native Americans at the time was like 3 times as much as when it was when the colonists were there, and the colonists had that crazy advantage with their weapons and stuff. I mean, it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to think that, the Vikings, in fact, did get their ass kicked. They probably did. But at Lance's Meadows, there's no sign of any battles or anything, and there's not even any like dead livestock or anything there too. So, you know, if the Vikings did fight the natives, it certainly wasn't there. And when they did decide to leave, because eventually they did, because we don't have any bodies there, or at least not from any battles, they left very organized, and they, you know, there wasn't a struggle, you know, leaving, which is interesting. You know, you would think they would probably set up more towns and villages and stuff, but no, you don't see that. That's very interesting to me. The thing that kind of puts a wrench in the whole thing for me is like, we were just talking about all the diseases that wiped out the Native Americans. Why did the Vikings not give Native Americans diseases that caused their population to collapse much earlier? That doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Maybe they had a lot more limited contact, especially if, maybe they had a lot more limited contact, because like we said, we only have this one Viking settlement for sure, and it was really up north. And they certainly didn't interact with where they lived. So I guess, if you're only running into them and fighting them, and then like the people that would have got infected are dead anyway, or you just traded with them and it was like a quick little thing and then off you go. I don't know though. That seems weird to me that we don't have maybe there was a population dip and then they bounced back, but then you would think they would have some kind of immunity to the diseases that would come later. So I don't know. Maybe the colonists from Europe, from England and stuff, just didn't have or had different pathogens than the Vikings would have. But then, like I just said before, it's like the time of the Black Plague too that the Vikings started pulling out. So it seems weird to me. It seems like there's a lot to learn there that we don't know about. What is interesting, actually, is there was a lot of people who thought that the Vikings got as far south as Gloucester, Massachusetts. And it was like this big craze that happened in like the late 1800s. This one guy, and I don't remember the name of the dude, and I didn't write it down. But essentially, there was this very popular book that was written at the time. That was like the Vikings discovered the Americas before Columbus, which is true. But it was like everybody read this book and they were like, oh my God, there's Vikings everywhere. And they would just go to these archaeological sites that were clearly just like colonists or other, time periods later than the Vikings. And they were like, look, it's clearly Vikings. It wasn't. They were just like, it's like when people all go crazy and they're like, oh, look, Bigfoot's in my backyard. Bigfoot's here. Everyone just wanted to be the cool kid on the block. Everyone just wanted their windmill and their abandoned farm to be Viking, and it wasn't. And, it's funny that I mentioned windmills. I learned about this Viking connection forever ago from like this History Channel show called like Search for the Holy Grail or whatever. And it was about Vikings and Templars going to America. It must have been from the same time period, honestly, where there was just like these tons of like rocks that were forged by people in the 1800s with like Norse runes and stuff. And they're like, oh, look at this real Norse rune stone. Like the Vikings came all the way to Wisconsin. No, they didn't. They didn't. Still interesting to think that everybody was freaking out about that at the time. So long story short, in this Lowell area, yeah, you probably had like secondhand contact where, these peoples were interacting with tribes that could have interacted with the Vikings, but unfortunately, it doesn't seem like they got that far. I could be wrong. We might find something in the future that says otherwise. Okay, so kind of getting to the end of this now. So we got the last character of the more modern era. So from that same paper that we had, that one guy, Gary Morin, we also have Onqui Tase, or Tasi. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. So he was the chief of the Mohawk Indians and the founder of the UNACC, United Native American Cultural Center, and also the creator of GLICA, Greater Lowell Indian Cultural Association, which is still around today. I believe there was a recent Inside Lowell podcast episode with the current leader, Tom Eagle Rising Libby, current chief. I believe they had another member on from that same podcast. Very interesting. Go back and check that out. That was from September 24th. Anywho, back to the original guy, Onqui Tase. Like I said, he created those Native American associations. But he was around at a Dracut Selectmen meeting. I should mention before that time, it was 1941. The Varnum family that I mentioned earlier, the guys that bought the land from, they bought the land from the Native Americans. They sold a lot of their land, not the farm itself, like I mentioned, they still have. But in 1941, that's when, the whole point of this podcast, Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro, came into being. That's when it became like an actual public space. But in 1973, Onqui Tase was saying he wanted a portion of this land in Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro to be used for an Indian culture museum and like a smaller reservation. And, supposedly this came to be. And there's also a building in Devens, Mass, I believe, that or New Hampshire, where they actually have a building. I looked into this one a lot. I tried to see where in Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro they had this area, this conservation area, this small reservation. I couldn't find a single thing about it. I will say, in the obituary for this guy, it did say that it came to being and that it does exist. The only thing that I could find physically while actually exploring Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro is this random small rhododendron tree that's just growing in the middle of the woods. If I don't know how many horticulturists are listening right now. Rhododendron tree. A lot of people have them in like their backyards and stuff. You know, it's not a natural growing tree in this area, I don't think, or they're rare at that point. And right underneath it, there's this plaque that read something like, this tree was planted in dedication to all the Native American chiefs and chieftains that fought to keep their land from the colonists or whatever. Which is, you know, that's pretty cool. I'm not going to give away where that is, though. You're going to have to find out for yourself. It's a cool spot. So, yeah, I mean, that's really the only thing I could find of Native American significance in the park itself. So, yeah. And I guess a last note that I should mention is that Passaconaway, the guy we were mentioning before, who was supposedly had good relations with Colonel Ting, and owned much of the land before he sold it, or, you know, sold it to the colonists. There's a statue of him in Lowell. Let's see, it's in Edson Cemetery, Lowell, Massachusetts. I was going to send Teddy a photo of it, but I forgot. So, I mean, you're probably listening right now anyway, so I'll just describe what it was. So, in the cemetery, there is a statue, quote unquote, of Passaconaway. And I say quote unquote because it looks nothing like him. There's like a depiction of Passaconaway. I don't know if it's contemporary with his time. I think it might have been like 1700s that it was drawn. But, you know, he has like this very interesting, like leather, almost looks like a gown or something that like is going over him. And he has this hat that's kind of shaped like a gourd. I don't know if it was leather or actually a gourd or something. In Edson Cemetery, they just have like a stereotypical Plains regalia Native American, which they didn't dress like that in this area. Yeah, if it was like a statue in like New Mexico, that would make sense. So they straight up just got the exact wrong thing for the area. That's like if you wanted a statue of Leif Erikson and you dress him up like a Roman soldier. It makes no sense. So I don't know why nobody complains about that. Maybe people do. I haven't heard anyone complaining about that, but they should be, because that is just not a good look. Not a great look. So yeah, that's that brief history crash course. Maybe you learned something. Maybe you absolutely hated it. Regardless, thanks for listening. If you like Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro, check it out. It's a cool park, like I said. I've seen tons of cool wildlife. I've seen beavers, you know, not cutting down trees for farmland, but I saw beavers. I've seen owls. One time I thought I saw like a golden monkey running around. That was probably just a dog. I was on a bike. I saw it really fast. Probably wasn't like a Sasquatch or nothing, but at the time I thought it was a golden monkey. Yeah, there's tons of biking paths and stuff. Yeah, go to Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro. It's on Trotting Park Road, Lowell, Mass. They got a pretty large, not driveway, parking lot. It's a pretty big parking lot. They're extending it right now. I don't believe it's finished yet. But soon enough, there'll be extra parking. So, you know, this podcast is going to go viral and everyone's going to go there now. So thankfully they're going to have that extra parking. Technically hunting is allowed there. Not right now in this season. It doesn't seem like there's been hunting for a couple years directly in the forest. There's definitely fishing in Althea Lake. If you go to mass.gov, you can learn all about the hunting tags that you can get. You know, you don't have to wear orange. You don't worry about people shooting things off in there. That's not going to be happening. If you're going there in the wintertime, great for cross-country skiing. I've seen a lot of people doing that. Tick season's kind of starting back up again. Fun fact about tick season, there's actually like a time in between like August and September where there's not as many ticks, which is kind of weird. They kind of like lay low. I don't know how that works. I don't know why that happens. Actually, I might have been from September to... No, I think it was October to September. Anyway, it's cold out now, so you're going to have long pants. So it probably won't be as much of an issue as maybe it was in the middle of the summertime. And yeah, tons of bike paths. There's like a concrete main path, so if you don't have a mountain bike, you could just like use your regular bike if you wanted to. I tried longboarding on that one time. I almost died going down a hill, running over pine cones. Don't do that. Bikes, you'd be fine, though. And that pretty much sums it up. Check out Lowell-Dracut-Tyngsboro. It's a cool place. Check out Inside Lowell podcasts here at WellPoint Studios. We got tons of other interesting podcasts. Check out that one with the Glicka founder from September. That was really cool. And you know what? Have a great day.